going to look incredible in this one. Relax. Let go. Let yourself slip into something exquisite, something effortless, something unforgettable. And when you're ready, baby, dream of a new life.
My Best Friend's Girlfriend by Catherine Serafina. Chapter 8. I woke to the insistent chime of the doorbell, followed immediately by a sharp, impatient knock that echoed through the apartment. Groaning, I kicked off the covers and dragged myself upright, still tangled in the heavy fog of sleep. My limbs felt sluggish, uncooperative, as I stumbled toward the front door, barely registering the cool morning air brushing against my skin. Without thinking, I reached for the handle and pulled the door open. Garrett stood on the other side, already grinning, wide, unapologetic, and entirely too pleased with himself. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," he said smoothly, his voice casual, but his eyes weren't subtle in the slightest. They flicked over me, slow and deliberate, lingering just enough to send a faint, prickling awareness crawling up my spine. For a split second, I didn't understand why. Then the chill hit me properly. I went still. It wasn't just that he was looking, it was how he was looking. Garrett had seen me 1,000 times before, hungover, half asleep, covered in sweat after a workout, sprawled out on a couch in clothes that should have been thrown away years ago. None of that had ever mattered. This did. His attention felt focused, intentional, like he was taking in details he'd never had a reason to notice before. And the worst part? I was suddenly aware of those details too. The way the fabric rested against my body, the way it shifted when I breathed, the way even the smallest movement seemed to draw attention instead of hiding from it. It made my skin feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with how much I was actually showing. The lavender chemise I'd fallen asleep in, soft, weightless, perfect in the quiet privacy of my bedroom, suddenly felt like the most inadequate piece of clothing I had ever worn. The satin clung lightly to my body, tracing every curve as though it had been designed specifically to highlight them. It skimmed over the fullness of my chest, dipped along the narrow line of my waist, then flared gently over my hips in loose, teasing folds. The lace at the neckline did very little to conceal anything. If anything, it drew attention, framing rather than hiding. And the hem? I glanced down, my stomach dropping slightly. At some point during the night, it had ridden up far higher than it had any right to be, leaving most of my thighs bare to the cool morning air. Heat rushed into my cheeks all at once. Morning, I muttered, instinctively crossing my arms over my chest in a half-hearted attempt at modesty. The motion only made things worse, pressing everything together and emphasizing exactly what I was trying to hide. Garrett's grin deepened, his gaze flicking downward for just a moment before returning to my face, thoroughly entertained. "Well, damn," he said under his breath, letting out a low chuckle. "That's quite the look." I shifted my weight, tugging at the hem of the chemise, trying, and failing, to coax it lower. The fabric slipped through my fingers like water, refusing to cooperate. "I wasn't expecting company," I said, my voice still rough with sleep, and now something closer to embarrassment. "Clearly," he replied, completely unfazed. His tone was light, teasing, but there was an edge of something else there now, something more observant. "Not that I'm complaining. That color looks amazing on you." I swallowed, suddenly very aware of just how exposed I was. "Well, options were limited," I said, gesturing vaguely over my shoulder toward the disaster zone that was my bedroom, clothes and lingerie scattered everywhere from the night before. Garrett leaned casually against the doorframe, crossing his arms as he looked past me for a second, clearly taking it all in. "Yeah," he said, amused, "but you could have just thrown on an old t-shirt and some boxers, like you used to." The thought lingered longer than it should have. It should have been the obvious choice. Comfortable, familiar, safe, but even picturing it now felt off. Like trying to force myself back into something that didn't quite fit anymore, not physically, but mentally. Last night, I hadn't chosen the chemise because it made sense. I'd chosen it because it felt right. That realization sat heavier than it should have. I hesitated. The thought landed strangely. Those old habits, oversized shirts, worn-out fabric, whatever happened to be clean, felt distant now. Not wrong exactly, just unfamiliar in a way they never had before. Last night, I hadn't even considered them. The chemise had been there, soft and smooth and effortless, and I'd slipped into it without thinking twice. Now, standing here, I was thinking about it. I tugged at the hem again, more out of nerves than hope. I didn't really think about it, I admitted. I guess I'm still getting used to all this. Garrett let out a quiet laugh, pushing himself upright. Hey, no judgment here, you do you, Ksenia. He gave me a quick wink before clapping his hands together, shifting gears instantly. Now go get ready. We've got a lot to do today. I muttered something under my breath and turned away, heading back toward my room. The light fabric shifted with every step, brushing against my legs in a way that made me painfully aware of it, and of him still standing behind me. I shut the door a little faster than necessary and leaned back against it, exhaling sharply. From the other side, Garrett's voice carried through, far too amused. Oh, and don't forget to use the fancy shampoo and all that stuff I got you. You want to smell like roses, right? I rolled my eyes, grabbing a towel as I made my way toward the bathroom. Yeah, thanks for the reminder, asshole, I called back, shaking my head, though a small reluctant smile tugged at the corner of my lips despite everything. Stepping into the shower, I turned on the water, and the moment the warm spray hit my skin, I felt the difference immediately. It wasn't just the temperature or the pressure, it was the way my body responded to it. As a man, a shower had always been something simple, almost mechanical. Get in, rinse off, get clean, get out. There had never been any reason to think about it beyond that. Now I couldn't not think about it. The water didn't just hit me, it traced me. It followed the gentle slope of my shoulders, curved along my chest, and slipped down the narrowing line of my waist before continuing lower. Every droplet seemed to linger just a fraction longer, as if my skin itself had changed the way it received the world. There was a softness there now, a sensitivity that made even standing still feel different, like I was becoming aware of something that had always existed, but I had never been equipped to notice. I reached for the shampoo, flipping open the cap and pausing as the scent reached me. It was light, floral, almost layered in a way that felt strangely deliberate. Before, shampoo had just been something practical, something I used without ever really registering it. Now the fragrance filled the steam around me, subtle but persistent, and for the first time, I understood why someone might actually enjoy this part of the process. Working it into my hair proved to be far less straightforward. The sheer volume of it caught me off guard immediately. Thick strands slipped through my fingers as I tried to build a lather, the weight increasing as the water soaked through it. My arms lifted higher and stayed there longer, my fingers working slowly through each section instead of finishing in a matter of seconds like I used to. It wasn't difficult exactly, but it demanded more attention, more time, more effort than I was used to giving something so routine. By the time I rinsed it out, I could already feel it in my shoulders. The conditioner followed, smoother and heavier, coating everything in a soft, almost silky layer. This time, my fingers moved more easily, sliding through the length of my hair as the tension from earlier eased. The motion became slower, more deliberate, less about finishing and more about the act itself. It was oddly calming, in a way I hadn't expected, something that required just enough focus to quiet everything else. When I rinsed again, the strands slipped through my fingers like liquid, the water carrying everything away in slow, clean streams. I lingered there for a moment longer than necessary, letting the spray run over me, not because I needed to, but because I didn't feel the same urgency to leave. Reaching for the body wash, I poured a small amount into my palm and watched it bloom into a soft lather before bringing it to my skin. I started at my shoulders, moving gradually downward, my hands passing over my collarbones and along my arms. even that felt different. Before, it had always been automatic, quick, efficient, something I barely paid attention to. Now every movement felt more deliberate, not because I was trying to slow down, but because my body seemed to register it differently. When I reached my chest, I paused without meaning to. The difference wasn't just visual, it was physical, immediate, and impossible to ignore. The shape, the way even light contact registered more clearly than I expected. My hands adjusted instinctively, moving slower, more carefully, as I worked across the unfamiliar contours. It wasn't uncomfortable, and it wasn't anything I didn't understand. It was just new, in a way that demanded awareness. I exhaled quietly and continued, moving down over my stomach and along the narrowing line of my waist before following the outward curve of my hips. The proportions alone were enough to throw me off. Everything connected differently, flowed differently. Even the way the water moved over me seemed to follow a new logic. Before, it had simply fallen. Now it traced paths, lingering, shifting, reacting to shape instead of ignoring it. My hands followed those same paths without thinking, as if trying to map out something I didn't fully understand yet. By the time I reached my legs, I felt more grounded again, less reactive, more aware. The initial shock of everything had dulled just enough to let me process instead of just feel. Still, small things kept catching me off guard. The shift in balance when I moved, the subtle difference in how I stood, the way my center of gravity felt just slightly off from what I was used to. It wasn't overwhelming anymore, just different. When I finally finished, I remained under the water for a few extra seconds, letting it run over me one last time before turning it off. The sudden absence of sound felt heavier than expected, the quiet settling in around me in a way that made everything feel more real than it had a moment ago. Stepping out, I reached for a towel and wrapped it around myself, almost automatically, only to catch my reflection in the mirror as I did. For a second, I didn't react. I just stood there, taking it in. Wet hair clung to my back. Darker now, heavier, the strands resting against skin that still felt unfamiliar despite everything I just experienced. Water traced down my shoulders and along my arms before disappearing beneath the edge of the towel. The entire image felt cohesive in a way that still didn't quite make sense. Not staged, not artificial, not temporary. Just consistent. As a man, I never would have stood there like this. I would have dried off, gotten dressed, moved on without a second thought. Now I found myself lingering, not out of vanity, but because it felt impossible not to acknowledge what I was seeing. It didn't look wrong. That was the part that stayed with me. I tightened the towel slightly, exhaling as I let that realization settle before finally turning toward the door. "All right," I called out, my voice steadier now. "What's next?" "We've got a long day ahead," Garrett replied from the living room. Of course we do, I thought, but this time, it didn't feel quite as overwhelming as it should have. Garrett had told me to throw on something casual and comfortable, so I dug through the boxes again, trying to find something that didn't feel like I was putting on a costume. Eventually, I settled on a pair of bikini-style panties and a matching bra. Simple enough, though even that still felt strange. The fabric was lighter, more delicate than anything I'd ever worn before, and the act of putting it on carried a quiet awareness that hadn't existed a few days ago. After that, I pulled on a pair of capris that fit snugly along my hips and thighs, pairing them with a funnel neck cap sleeve top. The outfit itself was casual, perfectly normal for a day out, but the way it sat on my body wasn't something I could ignore. It followed every curve, every line, in a way that made even simple clothing feel intentional. Figuring I should start getting used to it sooner rather than later, I reached for a pair of low-edge sandals, just a couple of inches, nothing dramatic, but enough to feel different. Even stepping into them took a second to adjust. My balance shifted subtly, my posture correcting itself almost automatically as I stood. It wasn't difficult, just unfamiliar. Brushing out my hair turned into its own small ordeal. The sheer volume of it made the process slower than I expected, my arms working more than they had any right to for something so routine. By the time I pulled it back into a simple ponytail, I felt like I'd already done more than enough to justify a break. When I finally stepped out of the bedroom, Garrett turned and stopped. "Wow," he said, his grin spreading almost immediately. "You look beautiful." The word hit harder than I expected. Heat rushed to my face before I could stop it, and I looked away, suddenly very aware of myself in a way that had nothing to do with mirrors. Thanks," I muttered, clearing my throat as I tried to play it off. It was strange enough being seen like this, but hearing it from him, of all people, made it feel even more real. "Don't mention it," he said easily, though the look on his face hadn't changed. I shifted my weight, trying to shake off the moment before it lingered too long. "So, what's the plan for today?" "First stop," he said, clapping his hands together like he'd been waiting for this all morning. "Mani and pedicure." I stared at him. "You're kidding." "Nope," he said, completely unfazed. "You want to look your best tomorrow, don't you? Trust me, it's part of the whole experience." Reluctantly, I agreed, and before long, we were on our way. The salon was smaller than I expected, bright, clean, and quietly welcoming. The kind of place that felt immediately comfortable without trying too hard. Garrett had already made appointments for both of us, and to my surprise, he didn't just drop me off. He sat down right beside me. He wiggled his toes as he settled into the chair. "See? I'm committed. Full support." I couldn't help but laugh. The image of him sitting there taking it completely seriously, cutting through the lingering awkwardness. "Yeah, but your experience isn't exactly the same." "True," he admitted with a smirk. "No French tips for me." The pedicure started with a warm soak, and to my surprise, I felt myself relaxing almost immediately. The tension I hadn't realized I was carrying began to ease as the process continued, each step slower and more deliberate than anything I would have ever done for myself before. By the time we moved on to the manicure, I found myself leaning into it a little more. If I was doing this, I might as well do it right. Extensions, French tips, a glossy finish. The end result was clean, elegant, and undeniably polished. Another small detail that made everything feel just a little more complete. Garrett, true to his word, kept things simple. A basic trim and buff, nothing more. When we were done, we headed to a nearby diner for lunch. The place was casual and unassuming, the kind of spot where nobody paid too much attention to anyone else. And that helped. As we sat there, eating and talking like we always had, I felt something shift. Not physically this time, but mentally. The awkwardness from earlier faded into the background, replaced by something more familiar, comfortable even. Garrett kept things light, easy, never pushing too hard, and I found myself appreciating that more than I expected. He wasn't treating me like a project or a joke, just like me. Despite everything, the transformation, the pressure of tomorrow, the lingering strangeness of it all, I couldn't deny it. Today had been nice, and with the gala coming up, I had a feeling I was going to need every bit of that. The diner was a cozy little spot, with red vinyl booths and the faint hum of classic rock playing in the background. We slid into a booth, and I couldn't help but notice how odd it felt navigating even simple things with my new long fingernails. Something as simple as using my phone's touchscreen became a weird challenge, with the tips of my nails constantly hitting the screen instead of my fingertips. I sighed, adjusting my grip awkwardly as I scrolled through the menu. "Everything okay over there?" Garrett asked, smirking as he noticed my fumbling. "Yeah, it's just these nails. How do women do anything with these?" I muttered. "You get used to it," he said with a shrug. "Besides, they look great." I gave him a flat look before glancing back at the menu. "I'm getting breakfast. I didn't eat this morning and I'm craving bacon." Garrett laughed. "Bacon it is. What else?" "Runny fried eggs and toast to dip in the yolks," I said decisively. "Solid choice," he replied as he flagged down the waitress. The waitress came by, pulling out her notepad with a cheerful smile. "What can I get for you two today?" Garrett didn't miss a beat. Before I could say a word, he leaned back casually and said, "The lady will have bacon, runny fried eggs, and toast to dip in the yolks. And I'll take a club sandwich with fries. Thanks." I froze, caught completely off guard. "The lady," I echoed, giving him a wide-eyed look as the waitress jotted everything down and walked off. Garrett shrugged, smirking. "What?" It sounded polite. "Polite?" I said, still trying to process how weird it felt to have someone else, especially him, order for me like I was some refined lady from a 1950s movie. "You're welcome," he said with a grin, clearly enjoying my discomfort. I shook my head, trying to ignore the strange, surreal feeling of being treated so differently. When the food arrived, I immediately went for the bacon, savoring the salty, crispy goodness. Garrett stuck with a sandwich and fries, but we both ate in companionable silence for a while before the conversation picked up. "So," Garrett said, dipping a fry into ketchup, "what's been the weirdest thing so far?" I raised an eyebrow. You mean besides, the entire situation?" "Yeah, aside from the obvious," he said, grinning. I thought about it for a moment, then gestured vaguely at myself. "Honestly, all the little things. The nails, the hair, the bounce," I said, glancing down briefly. "The bounce?" Garrett repeated, snorting into his drink. "You know what I mean," I said, rolling my eyes. Then, without thinking, I gave my breasts a quick push-up and let them bounce slightly for emphasis. Garrett nearly choked on his drink, coughing as he tried not to laugh. "Oh my God, you're really getting into character now, huh?" I flushed slightly, realizing what I'd just done. "Shut up," I muttered, trying to hide a grin. "Hey, I'm not complaining," he said, still laughing. "But yeah, I get it. That's gotta be an adjustment." "It is," I admitted, fidgeting slightly. "Everything moves differently now. Things continue to move even after I've stopped. It's weird." He nodded, trying not to laugh too hard. "Fair enough. Anything else?" "Just how normal it feels sometimes," I admitted. "Like, I thought it would be harder, but people just treat me like any other woman. Nobody looks at me like I'm out of place. It's kind of surreal." Garrett leaned back in his seat, smiling. "That's because you're pulling it off perfectly. Honestly, you've got nothing to worry about tonight." I sighed, poking at the yolk of my egg with a piece of toast. "Speaking of tonight, what's the rest of the plan for today?" "Well," Garrett said, leaning forward, "first, we need to go back to your place and decide on the dress. That way, the hair and makeup can be tailored to match it. After that, it's off to the salon." I raised an eyebrow. "You really think all that's necessary?" "Absolutely," he said, nodding firmly. "Trust me, this is how it's done. You want to wow everyone, don't you?" I couldn't argue with that, so I finished my breakfast and nodded. "All right, let's do it your way."
I don't know who I am anymore, but I do know this. Bacon fixes a lot.
Still lost in the dream, aren't you? Don't worry, I've got plenty more where that came from. Sweet, sexy, transformative little dreams. All just a click away. And if you're craving the naughty versions, the ones too hot for YouTube, you know exactly where to find them. On my Patreon. I'll be waiting, gorgeous.